Hello, and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz. I'm your host, and this is episode 51, Diversifying Repertoire is a Personal Journey with Dr. Janet Galván. In this touching and vulnerable conversation, Dr. Galván and I discuss the very important issue of programming and preparing to perform music from an ever-growing number of traditions and cultures. This can be an overwhelming topic to approach in many ways, partly due to the sheer number of styles and performance practices that exist. None of us can master them all, and that's okay. Downstream from this problem is whether or not we give ourselves and our colleagues grace when they make mistakes. Do we shame the conductor who presents an inauthentic performance, or do we offer help and resources? This episode is structured as a help and a resource. Dr. Galván has done tremendous amounts of work in the trenches on this topic in her storied career, and that experience has left her with some very solid practices and procedures for each of us to use when we approach a new style of music to introduce to our ensembles. And when I say in the trenches, what I mean is by doing it, by actually doing it, by digging in and putting a concert together, knowing that the music that she's about to present to a choir is not the music that she grew up with. And you have to develop a practice, you have to develop a procedure, which I'll give you a hint is very similar to the procedure we use with all other music. And I think that's kind of the point, is we need to get to the point where we are approaching all music with equal respect. I think we all agree with that concept, but it's the how to do it. That's the challenge. And so much we get kind of preached at about how important it is to do it, and leaves us with very little to take into our classroom. And I'm hoping this episode is helpful for you in this way. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this conversation, I've got some thank yous and some announcements to briefly walk you through. First, Patreon is a website that allows listeners to this show to contribute because they feel like this show provides them value, and they appreciate that I don't charge anything for it. Recognizing that it's a lot of work to put on this show, and there's a lot of expense behind it. My goodness, like lately, the Facebook advertising costs during the pandemic have skyrocketed. The ability for me to get the word out to people is harder now than it was when I started the show in February of 2019. Things like that, right? There's an underlying cost to the show. And so sometimes people want to help with that. Sometimes people just appreciate it, like a tip, right? So as one of the little carrots to dangle over at Patreon, there's also more content. I create an episode once a month that only that crowd gets to hear. So you can go to patreon.com/choralosophy to sign up. And like I said, as little as $3 a month gets you in the door over there. There's also a producer level that you can opt into at the $10 a month level. Right now, we have an awesome and growing group of producers on the show, like Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Kyle Peterson, Michael Heron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. So thank you to those folks and all of the folks over at Patreon who are engaging in that extra content and that support in that way. It means a lot. Also, we have mymusicfolders.com, which is a great website. They have a companion website, by the way. I don't talk about it as much, called mychoirrobes.com. And I was just looking on that site the other day, and you can get some really affordable choir robes on there. And in today's day and age, with sensitivity being increased in a good way in gendered clothing for ensembles, a choir robe's a great solution because a choir robe is not gendered. So if you're looking for a new way to solve the problem of your ensembles and their attire, they've got some really affordable options there. Plus, if you enter Choralosophy at checkout on your robe purchases, you can get a 5% discount, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're ordering from your school with a lot of robes or a lot of singers, that's hundreds of dollars in savings that you could be offering yourself there. So that's an awesome opportunity. Plus, there's sightreadingfactory.com that affiliates with this show, which means if you sign up with the Choralosophy checkout code, you get 10% off. And it is, especially right now with virtual learning being so common, is a critical product. If you don't have sightreadingfactory.com membership yet for you and your students, don't wait anymore. There is so much opportunity for growth and for self-assessment and teacher assessment on that website. So go check that out. And like I said, enter Choralosophy at checkout to get 10% off your order there. Okay, last but not least, we have a convention that we are trying to bravely forge forward with in April in Atlanta. It's April 9 to 11, so it's a weekend. So we've got this centered around a weekend. We know that professional development in person is pretty much a thing of the past, at least anytime soon. So we're going to be optimistic and create an opportunity to get together a small group. We're going to cap it at no more than 60 people. So the first 60 that sign up get to do it. And the idea then is we can control social distancing, we control all kinds of safety things there by doing it that way. We've got a hotel reserved that is understanding of the fact that COVID regulations could kick back up in the spring and we have to pull out, and they've said that that's okay. Plus, it's right by the airport there in Atlanta, so you don't have to rent a car, do anything like that. They'll take a shuttle right from the airport to the hotel. We get together, we have a completely innovative, new kind of in-person professional development opportunity that maybe it becomes something down the road. So I hope that you will decide to take a chance and come down there with us and do some unbelievable sessions. We've got Ryan Main coming. We've got Maria Ellis. We've got Jacqueline Johnson. We've got Jaron Jorgensen, Christy McLean. We're going to be doing sessions on things like teaching literacy, choral yoga, of course. We're going to be talking about leading and engaging rehearsals. We're going to be talking about how to teach literacy in a reading session format. There's all kinds of things that we've got planned, and there's more and more coming. So make sure you get signed up for that. I think it's going to be a great opportunity. Okay, that's it. Here we go. It is time for you to hear my conversation with Dr. Janet Galván. Okay, everybody, I'm here with Janet Galván, and she is, of course, a well-known name to all of you in choir world, just a legendary luminary choral director, and I'm so honored to have her on the show. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Honored.
Good. We're excited to talk. We're going to talk through a variety of things tonight, but of course, going to center our conversation around some ideas related to programming, diversifying programming, maybe even stretching our own personal boundaries as conductors of what types of music we feel comfortable with. We'll dive into that in a minute. But first, I'd like for you to introduce yourself to the audience, for maybe the people who don't know your work and your background. How was it exactly that you maybe went from little Janet to grown-up Janet, who's collegiate music director and choral director, and have spent your life doing this? How did that happen?
Well, started with how much do you want to know? Started with my mother singing around the house. I had country musicians as cousins. My granddad, I never got to meet, but apparently he played country fiddle.
Uh-huh.
And I grew up in a church. So I, as a toddler, apparently sat on the minister's knee at the Sunday night service and sang solos. And I remember singing in the children's choir, holding a book, but I couldn't read. But the children's choir was very, very crucial, and learned to play piano by ear. And eventually my mother said, okay, we really need to have her take piano lessons. And music was such a big part of our church, very singing church. So I learned to play piano, played at church, was loaned out to other churches when they needed it. I don't think I was that good, but apparently, good enough to help people out on a Sunday morning. And elementary school choirs played a very important part in my development. And in seventh grade, met Dwayne Best, and the magic began. He was so inspiring and built such a beautiful sense of community in Eden, North Carolina. And then he was also my high school director, and of course did the musicals. So I just really wanted to conduct from the time I was in the fourth grade.
Mm.
I wanted to sing, and I think if I had known, if I hadn't been a hick from North Carolina, I might have actually gone to New York and auditioned for Broadway. But luckily, I didn't think that was even possible. That was not in the realm of thinking for a little girl from Eden, North Carolina. So I taught, and I taught public school in rural areas of North Carolina, and then took a year off to, life happens sometimes, and then ended up going to finish my doctorate. I did my master's. right after my undergrad, which I don't advise for anyone, but for me, it made sense because I started school at 17
Mm,
and, did not get the voice teacher who changed my life until I was, a sophomore, and I
mm,
just felt like I wasn't ready to be my own teacher, and I got offered the choral assistantship, so I said, "Okay." So
yeah.
it just, it just is. I think sometimes the happiest things just happen to us, and there's no I wish I could say I planned that out so beautifully, but I didn't, it just happened.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And one of the things I love, and one of my favorite things about getting to do this show as an opportunity for me to meet people like you and ask your story is that I find there's a pattern where so many people that I ask that question to, of like, what got you going in
Mhm.
this art form, is there's usually some catalyst teacher. Like there's some person that we met along the way that inspired us, and it just makes me, it kind of reminds me, our jobs are important. They
Very.
they lead to something for somebody. You never know when. And like you said, just kind of the happy accidents that oftentimes happen, and we don't know which kid in our classroom might need to be inspired at that
Yeah.
moment. It's such a neat thing. Um, so yeah, I appreciate that. That's a great background. Just to and so why don't you just real quick then that's the background part. What's your day to day now?
Well, my day to day now is very unusual because it's COVID,
Well, yes.
and, and for a lot of reasons, that I won't go into, I had planned to be working at Ithaca College for 3 more years, and, last summer, I decided my husband retired, and I decided that I would go 1 more year,
Mm,
and we had arranged to do that, and just for a lot of reasons that I really don't wanna go into because it's no one's fault. I
right.
just thought, "You know what? I need to retire from Ithaca College." So, I'm not retired, I have repotted.
Ah, wow. Yeah. So you've got that. That's interesting. So the day-to-day kind of routine obviously in the last year has shifted probably pretty dramatically for you, just feeling obviously like a lot of us were slamming on the brakes with lots of things.
Mhm.
And so let's kind of pull our conversation back a little bit before the apocalypse, when we were all doing normal choir things.
Right.
And one of the, centering in on the topic that we're going to kind of focus on tonight, of with programming and choosing repertoire for your concerts. If you had to say, if you had to name kind of an overarching philosophy that you follow, could you do that, or is it more of a practice? How do you go about programming for your school year or for a concert?
That's such a, has been such an important part of my life, and I've seen particularly in it's always been true, but, in the last few years, I really see the students that I work with at the college level and when I did my youth choir in Ithaca, um, they wanted to they wanted it to be meaningful. So one of the questions that I ask constantly is, "Why are we here? Why are we doing this? And how can we communicate to the audience?" And they asked me to speak about this very topic about the diversity of programming. The faculty council at Ithaca College asked me to speak to the faculty about it because I'd been doing it for so long, looking at diverse repertoire. And I like variety. I love variety, and I grew up singing on Sunday mornings, we sing classical music upstairs, and on Wednesday and Sunday night, we pulled out the purple books, and I sang tenor an octave higher,
Uh-huh.
in the basement, and did what was called, white gospel, and, then my choral director also in the high school, we sang classical, but we sang quite a variety of styles, so I like that, and, um, many years ago now, I heard this CD. It was called a compilation of the world's greatest choirs with a little subtitle called From Om to Amen. And
Mm.
it was so exciting because you would hear Tibetan monks, and then the next thing would be Mozart, and the next thing would be a gospel choir, and nothing was treated as other. And that had a huge impact that I realized so much of the music is treated as other. And we know it's the Western European tradition. Um, and I didn't want to treat it as other. The World Symposium on Choral Music really affected me when I realized the whole world doesn't dress all in black and stand still. I mean, I'd done movement before, but
Mhm.
clearly that was huge. The Tapiola Children's Choir, where you had children walking out from the chorus, pulling out their violins, playing Finlandia better than any youth orchestra you ever heard. So studying West African. So all of this led me to not just do a diverse repertoire, but to incorporate it into the program. One of the things that makes me crazy when I go to conferences, and I did change it for a couple of years when I was in committees, is having a separate reading session for, I don't even like the word multicultural. We haven't come up with a good word for that. And I think mainly because when we say multicultural, it's other. So
Yeah.
rather than doing this reading session where only the people who are interested anyway are going to go, my idea was to let the chair of that committee give pieces to every division. So in the women's choir, or treble choir now, I'm sorry, in the treble choir, you're going to have infused this music so that if we could wipe out this sense of other and realize there is more than one tradition because we're living in a pluralistic society. And I really want everyone to be able to see themselves in the curriculum because I think that our choice of music either empowers or marginalizes. So then the trick for me is how do I put this and make a beautiful cohesive program? I love the masterworks. I love all of them. So I remember one summer there was yet another shooting of a black man in Minnesota. And one of my former students wrote this beautiful post. And he said, I am so angry right now. I don't know what to do, but I have learned to use my words, not my fist.
Mm.
And trust me, this guy could beat up anybody he would run into. He was a very fit young man. And he said, this is the most healing piece I know. It
Mm.
was Moses Hogan's We'll Walk Through the Valley of Peace.
Oh,
I
yeah,
said,
absolutely.
that's it. That's the center of my program. And so that's what we did. And we surrounded the audience and sang it. But then I said, take your music out with you. We invited the audience to join us and we sang it again. And it was the most beautiful experience. So I'm trying to look at my audience. And look, we're spoiled in schools. You're not, you're spoiled in school, but not with Contouré, right? You
Mhm.
have to get box office.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm in an institution, or have been for 37 years, where I am teaching people how to negotiate, how to be musicians, but also how to negotiate in the world. So we do a lot of projects about how do we get people to our concerts. So if you look around and think, who's not coming? What could we do that might bring in the people whose butts aren't in the seats? Pardon, that's a little crass, um, but that's sort of what I do. And luckily, I love a variety of music. So um, so I just start building the program, and I'm on YouTube listening to conferences. One of the reasons I'm on Facebook is because people post their pieces. Um, I learned a beautiful piece from Gary Packwood, this beautiful arrangement of "We Shall Overcome" when I was down working with his choir. So just finding all of this repertoire and figuring out how it could speak to me. And I've some of the things I've done very purposefully. and um, some things have just happened. So one year I planned Regularly Gay by Joan Simcoe.
Mm.
And so we were working in that, and I looked at the students, and we were doing the lighting for the day. And I just looked at them and I said, rainbow lighting? Is that too much? I went, no, that's great. You got to do it. So at the concert, when the lighting came up and people had the programming, they broke into this huge applause. I had people after that concert come to me with tears in their eyes, telling me how much that meant to them. That's really important. The year that we did Amat Remich's My Heart's Friend with the treble chorale, which at that point was an all-female group, um, there were people again because it was acknowledging. And again, they felt empowered because they were there. And that has happened to me so many times in my life. In New Mexico, I did a Nunez's 3 Dominican folk songs, and it happened to be in the hometown where in New Mexico where my husband's family is. And so his mom was sitting beside this woman who spoke only Spanish. So they got started a conversation, and Tess told me that the minute they started singing that, this woman, her entire being lit up. She was so thrilled to hear something that she really could relate to, because a lot of it, she thought it was great because her kid was singing, but she didn't really necessarily connect with that music. But after that, she connected with the whole concert, and children coming to me, and one little boy in California pulling on the hem of my dress. And I said, "What is it?" And I had used him as an example. I said, "Are there any native speakers in here?" He raised his hand. I said, "Would you mind speaking for us?" And he said, "Oh, I'd love to." So he came up. He said, "This is the first time in my life that I've been ahead of everybody." And
Right.
it's so beautiful. So I personally love the variety, and I like to find ways of mixing it in. And, you've seen that at ACDA. There are people who do these types of programs so beautifully. And then ultimately, my goal is we're going to communicate with the audience. So, what is it we want to communicate? And I don't decide that. We all decide that together. What's the essence of this piece? What are we trying to say with this? What does this poetry mean? Because a lot of the poetry is not in it's not the way our students speak.
Right.
So then we try to
Yeah.
figure it out. And sometimes, oh my God, they come up with these ideas that are so beautiful. And so then it goes beyond that then because I do a lot of movement and um, experimental things and try to get them to hear the music in a different way in all the rehearsals. Sometimes things just happen organically where I never meant to stage something, but now we're staging something.
Mm.
So, so that's just putting these programs together. And sometimes it's student request. Um, maybe there's someone in town for a period of time. Like we used to have a regular visitor from West Africa. Well, of course, I was going to, include him to come into the class. And I had a graduate student from Hawaii for 2 years. So we wrote a huge grant. We brought in Hawaiian musicians. We brought in hula, experts, and I mean, it was such a transformation for Ithaca College, in the middle of February.
That's awesome. Yeah, one of the things I like about just that kind of method and just narrative of your story, really, that you just told about how your programs have become and kind of maintained a diversity of culture, but also of style and of influence and all of language and all those things. I like that. Well, I'll put it this way: there's this term that's relatively newer on everyone's minds in the last 7 or 8 years, and that's tokenizing
Oh,
things,
mhm.
which is, and I love that what you describe is that you just have a genuine curiosity to have the program reach as many corners of humanity as you possibly can, rather than, okay, I got to go find a X number of pieces from this culture. I need to go find X number of pieces from this culture, which I think we all need to have kind of as our goal. That's not really the point. But if we all have the goal, like you just described, of I just want to be curious about as many different places and times and peoples that I can possibly expose these kids to, and especially because you told the story a minute ago of people being in the audience that you couldn't have necessarily anticipated were going to be in the audience, but they found something that resonated with them. Because when we get up in front of an audience, maybe there's 500 people in the audience and we have no idea who might be out there and might hear something from their childhood, that they just had never dreamed that they might go to a choir in the US or choir concert in the US and hear something in their language from their childhood. And I've had that's it's so it's I think that's the right approach. Have you ever come across in that approach? Have you ever had to deal with, let's say you come across a piece of music and you have that curiosity. You say, I've never done a piece of music in this language before, or I've never done a piece of music in this style before, and you feel kind of maybe unqualified to deal with it. And do you have a process for that? Of course, there are certain things we can look up and we can research,
Oh,
but
sure.
do you have a method for when you come up to a piece that you want to try, but you're just not sure how?
It depends on the piece.
Right. I'm going to interrupt the conversation briefly to remind you that there are some pretty awesome perks to being a listener to this show. Number one is the promo codes for all of these awesome vendors and choral music purveyors of fine wares that we have on the show, and for sheet music in particular, especially in this day and age, to be able to grab sheet music in a digital form in a PDF instantly and then get it out to your singers no matter where they are. Graphitepublishing.com and ryanmain.com are excellent resources, and I strongly encourage you to go check that out. Ryanmain.com he's a self-published composer who does excellent work, especially if you work with the middle school, high school age group kids, and you'll find stuff on his website for all ages, but he's got a sweet spot there. I would say a specialist in that area. And then, of course, there's graphitepublishing.com, which has a wide range of composers: Tim Takash, Jocelyn Hagan, Eric Barnum, Joshua Shank, several more, many of whom you've seen appear on the show in the composer exposure segments that we've done over the past couple of years. So head on over there, and don't forget to use Choralosophy at checkout for a 10% discount.
When we are approaching another style, the first thing, of course, is to read everything that you have in the sheet of music, if there is music. But because so many styles that we're trying to do aren't really traditionally notated, then I try to go to a sound source, which is so much easier now than it was many years ago. I try to get a recording of a choir from that culture doing it, maybe not that arrangement, but at least the arrangement. I try to, if it's a folk tune, I'll try to go to the original, like just not arranged, but see.
Yeah.
Um, if
Hmm.
there is someone in my area that's knowledgeable, I'll look, although because I've been doing this for so long and studying this for so long, I do know names of people that I know I can trust. Like, Tony Guzman is Dominican, Diana Sayas is from Puerto Rico, but both of them have studied other styles from other countries. So I can trust their arrangements. Um, Gospel, I've got the names of people. If it's a name I don't know, I look them up, which is way easier than it was in the olden days when I
Oh,
first
yeah.
started teaching. I remember calling Augsburg Press saying, who is Robert Wexler? I didn't know who that was. And it just, the information wasn't as available. And then I consider where it's from, and I get out maps, because I will say I have done pieces from places that I wasn't really exactly sure where they were. And then I read up on the country. Um, One of my favorites was I did this arrangement, and it was it was from a country where many languages were spoken, And so I thought, okay, so I did all this research. Okay, what are the two main ones? So then I went and I listened to those two languages, and I said, "Oh, it's that one." I could figure out from the pronunciation guide which language it was,
Hmm.
because you I couldn't see doing a piece where I didn't even know what the language was. I got it right, because I was doing it at a festival, and some of the kids on their way were in New York to Ithaca, were in New York City, and they were singing it. This guy said, "Oh, that's Yoruban, I know that." And so I was like, "Yes, we got that right." I try to ask, um, if at all possible, I will bring in a culture bearer, someone who really is from that tradition. Like one year we were doing the 3 Latvian carols from Earth Songs, beautiful.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Jan Sons did the arrangement, um, and I first heard one of those at an ACDA National. Ken Fulton did it, and I fell in love with it. So this young lady said, "I know a woman in Binghamton who's Latvian." I called her, she came up. She was thrilled that we were singing it. She helped us with the language. She told us what it meant. She told us about the instrument that would be homemade, that they would play along with that. So we ended up making those instruments. It's just a stick with bells in the bottom.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I do that, and then I do a lot. I look at videos if I can. Of course, if there's a particular one, like one piece that I was doing, the man said, "Oh, it's um, this type of folk song," and I thought, "Okay, I don't know what that means." So I went and found examples of that type of folk song. So I listen a lot, I practice a lot, I listen some more, I practice some more, and I try it. And I'm way better at it now. At the beginning, when I was doing all this, I started with genres that I was fairly comfortable with. But you get better. And the
Hmm.
thing is, it's not going to be authentic the first time, but I do a lot of homework on language. For example, in Spanish, people speak Spanish in so many different places,
Yeah.
and it's very different. And every single time when we have done Spanish, we've had at least one native speaker run up and say, I'm from Argentina. I can't believe you did the double L's the way we do it." Well, of course, it's a tune from Argentina. So I really think the bottom line is I don't just pick up Bach and sight read, or I don't do Bach and say, "I really don't know anything about Bach, but I'm just gonna sort of, you know, forge my way through it."
Right.
So I think if we give all the music the same level of respect and do the homework, and and I will ask, if I ask, I've learned to do that, "Are there any native speakers?" And so, would you mind seeing me? And I always ask them privately first if they would mind speaking,
Yeah.
um, because I think you can't just call in people and say, "Well, you're from Latvia. Will you speak that?" I think we have to show that respect because they might not want to.
Right. Yeah, and that's how we learn. So like you said, when you said that it's not going to always be authentic for the very first time,
Right.
I think that's important that choir directors give themselves permission to also be learners. Because I think, in fact, but before I get to that point, I wanted to tell a quick story of a culture bearing moment, because you brought up the Spanish language, which one of my favorite experiences as a choir director was being able to find a culture bearer in one of my classes who and this was so cool. I had one of my high school age students who was born in Venezuela,
Mhm.
and mother was Venezuelan, father American,
Mhm.
um, and so she grew up speaking bilingually, but also went back and forth a lot
Mhm.
to South America and was super smart. So we're doing in Contrai with adult professional singers. We're doing a concert of music from choral music from Latin America, South America. Okay, so there's music on this program from Venezuela. There's music from Argentina, a bunch of stuff. This was many years ago, and I knew enough about Spanish diction to be able to get through some basic things, but I knew that we were going to be kind of traveling some different countries with some different dialects down there. So
Mhm.
I bring in my high school student to this adult professional choir. And I remember and I of course asked her first, and she said, "Oh, I'd love to help with that. That sounds awesome." And I come in, and these adults, see me bring this 17-year-old girl in, and I can tell they're kind of rolling their eyes, like, what is she gonna, is she gonna really teach us? And she gets up and starts talking to us about, like, when you're singing with music from Venezuela, it has to sound this way. And she starts demonstrating, and then she goes into this little lecture about how Argentinian Spanish has a little bit more Italian influence from earlier settlers, and all these
Mhm.
grown-ups are like, how does she? This is a kid. How does she know? Like, well, because this is her life.
Right.
This is her culture, and it was such a neat experience. And then as a teacher, I just sit back and I'm just like letting her do all the thing. And but how empowering it is for a student in one of our choirs to be able to be in that position where, hey everybody, I get to share with you. You're all part of my team, and I get to share with you something that's very important to me. So I think that's a really, really important thing. But back to the idea of us not always being uh, necessarily authentic right away, and giving ourselves permission to kind of fumble through. I'd like to get your take on this, because I feel like sometimes in choir world, we are, and maybe because of social media and because of some things that happen on social media,
Mhm.
sometimes we're a little bit nervous to try things that we don't feel authentic with, because we're afraid that we might get criticized for trying it, having it not be authentic,
Mhm.
and then being shamed about it or made fun of, or whatever. And so what sometimes I worry about is that there might be choir directors out there who would shy away from trying music from different cultures necessarily because they don't feel qualified. Now, of course, you've given us a bunch of tips on ways to approach that, and I hope people do. Um, but have you noticed that phenomenon at all?
I have, and here's the thing, it is a fine line because, yes, we have to give ourselves permission for it not to be completely authentic. I mean, let's face it, West African singing, dancing, and drumming, the minute you take it away from the dirt in Ghana, it's not going to be authentic in a concert hall. It was never meant
Right.
to be in a concert hall. When you take gospel music out of the church, um, now sometimes we'll bring the church right along there, but so this idea of authenticity, I do think, however, um, one needs to. I think a lot of times people. I'm going to be careful. I say I don't think anyone ever has ill intentions, but I think sometimes because in a lot of universities um, people aren't grow or they're not coming through a program where they're learning how to approach music that is not Western European.
Hmm.
So there are things that one doesn't do. For example, I'll give an example. I was rather horrified at one point when people were singing a spiritual and broke into scat singing. That
Yikes.
Yeah, yikes. Um, I don't think the person was evil. They just hadn't quite done the homework or doing, you know, uh, well,
But
I'm not gonna go
it
I'm not
wasn't a
gonna go in.
it wasn't a jazz arrangement of a spiritual. So
No,
they just kind of editorialized.
I wouldn't do a jazz arrangement of spiritual. Just That's just me.
Yeah. Well,
And
I'm
look,
just saying at least that would make like some level of sense. But yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you.
no, and I think you have that's the other thing which you brought up. Before I would do well, I wouldn't do an arrangement of spiritual myself, but, I think we have to look at the historic content and the cultural context.
Hmm.
How is this music used in society? That's very interesting to the students, to the singers. What do they do? Is there this wall between the singer and the audience? In many traditions, there's not. In many, there are. I think we also have to be very careful about stereotypes. I remember once in one of my choirs, kids weren't trying to be evil, but they just started jumping around incredibly undisciplined. And I said, I'm going to show you a video. And I showed them a video of the Kenya National Choir, one of the most disciplined groups you've ever seen. There are a set of practices with music. We learn sets of practices about Baroque music,
Hmm.
and there are sets of practices with a lot of styles of music. And I think we have to, especially if we are from the culture with privilege doing music of another culture, to approach it with so much respect. Um, I know I've made mistakes, we all have, but I've always approached it with respect and asked the questions that I didn't know. For example, we have a gospel festival at Ithaca College every year. Um, my friend Baruch Whitehead started it. He came to me. He remembers this story. I don't remember it. He said, "You know what you said to me when I said I wanted to start a gospel festival? You said, 'How can I help?' And I said, 'Well, what else would I say?' And he said, 'Oh, you might say it's going to interfere with our choral program. You might have said, um, I want to be the conductor.' Well, of course, no. We bring in people who eat, breathe, sleep, who know gospel music inside and out. So the very first one, they wanted me to conduct one piece as the choral conductor there. And I said, okay, I grew up doing this, but I still consider myself only a student of gospel. And Black gospel is not my culture. And so I said, tell me how I can do this better. Tell me how I can do this more respectfully. And this wonderful community of people would give me tips. I'm so much better now, because of Chantel Wright, because of Linda Hall, because of Brooke Whitehead, because of all these people who Raymond Wise, Keith Hampton, they they allowed me to be taught, and they gave me so much freedom in learning, and were honest to say, I mean, no one ever said this is wrong, but they just say, oh, right here, here's one of the things you can do here. So I think that's a big thing, is being open to being a student
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
find out, and also that historical context. um Learning, I learned this summer in reading this incredible book about spirituals, some better ways to speak about them. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh no, you're fine. I think that one of the things that you said in there, I think is really important that needs to be highlighted, which is just pointing out that music from really no matter where it is, and really even whenever it came from, has a set of practices that go along with it, and it's very possible that they are not the set of practices that you or I may have learned in college. And there's a mixed bag there as I see it, in that um, time and resources at a collegiate program are limited. There is no, like, yes, we can talk about collegiate programs needing to diversify what they teach students. Of course, knowing that that's on one hand, but on the other hand, we can't teach kids in 4 years all the practices of all the styles forever. But we don't have to, I don't think. I think what we do is we teach them simply what you said, which is to just remember that every style you approach has a set of practices, and it's probably not the one you learned. So if we kind of go into it with that knowledge, that then at least we become that student that you talked about, where we're saying, okay, so what are the practices that I might have missed? So a good example of this would be, I think one of the examples you mentioned was some movement. I think you were referring to some movement ideas in the Kenyan choir, right? Well, if I was not raised in that culture and I was not taught that those things are pretty um, uh, understood, almost like performance practice would be to a Baroque singer with ornamentation. Like if you're a 21-year-old singer back in the Baroque period, you grew up hearing those ornaments, and you grew up understanding them in the same way that somebody who grows up in Kenya knows, right? So I start to look at that and I say, well, okay, I might be tempted as somebody who was raised in this culture over here to just look at that as just, they just happen to be moving a certain way. It's no big deal. and so I could just move a certain way and it's no big deal too. But then I think that gets into that's where we get into ourselves into trouble, is because then we're prioritizing that I learned my style in college, which means it's a it's an academically important thing, and
Mhm.
their style is just something that they do. It's just something they do. And whereas if we approach it in more of a like an exploratory, I want to learn what your practice is. I want to
Right.
learn when I move this way, does what am I doing that's making it, you know, not seem authentic? And even if we're just asking and we're just exploring, I think we're doing what we need to be doing.
I remember once, when I was doing the National Children's Choir way back in '95, and I had a Finnish piece on the program. And so that year in auditions, this young lady comes in and she said, "My name is Ea Pekala." And I thought, hallelujah. And I saw her after. I said, "I'm working on a Finnish piece. Could I ask for your help? I'm happy to pay you with the language." So she came in, and first I played her 2 recordings. One was beautiful. It was done by a North American choir. The other was a Finnish children's choir. I said, "Which is the Finnish?" She said, "Oh, that one." I said, "Tell me exactly what you hear that tells me that this is not the Finnish choir." And it was fascinating. She took me through this list, and then we sat, like looking at each other's mouths. I would say the Finnish and I say, "Tell me everything I'm doing wrong." And then I was so blessed because I happened to be, when I was doing a rehearsal, this woman came in and was watching. She walked up to me after the rehearsal in Washington, D.C. She said, "By the way, I'm a voice teacher." And I think she was Finnish. And I said, "Oh my God." So then I brought her in. And I think it's important to open the doors to let other experts in, because no matter how beautifully I might say the Spanish and learn it, it's so different with a native speaker, which is why the Musica Rusica, those recordings are so valuable to listen, because they give it exactly the way you do it. But the other thing is, um, looking at how people move. That's one of the things. Do they stand still? Do they move? Is it free movement? Is it very disciplined? Um, how are we doing this? So I think, as long as we try to learn the cultural context, and if we can get a culture bearer, for example, one of the questions I ask is there anything that I would do that would be offensive?
Mm. Mhm.
I mean, because there are some things, um, like where I grew up, you did not snap in church. It
Ah,
doesn't matter how
okay.
rocking the music was, you don't snap. You can clap, but snapping, that is not a religious move.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that would be, that's very offensive. Just like I'm from the South, and when, when I built this house, one of the neighbors said, um, "How many square feet's in the house?" And I was like, "Ugh." I'm thinking, you don't ask questions like, I mean, that's my Southern upbringing. That's just like,
Okay.
and I said, "It's
Yeah.
big enough for us." I mean, I thought,
Right.
that is none of your business. Like asking, how much did that cost? I mean, it's just, those are things we didn't ask when I no, the South is a very different place now. I've been gone for more years than I live there. But when I was growing up, those my mother said, "Never ask how much things cost. Don't ask people too many questions." So there are things, that can be offensive. And I think as long as we're, asking the questions, I can remember when Derek Fox came to Ithaca, and his study had been on, African, American shape note singing. I could not wait to have him come in and work with my choirs and tell them about this tradition that I had never even heard of. It just opened this door to something that was brand new. And he spoke at the concert, and I think the respect, I mean, I don't want to teach by anecdote, but it's just, uh, when I was doing the Western Division, um, middle school, treble choir, I noticed that in the repertoire, it didn't look like they had ever done anything on an unacquired that was authentic Hawaiian. And one of the sad parts of my life is that I went to work in Hawaii for several years. I mean, like lots of years working there. So I it got to the point when I go to restaurants, I say welcome home. And the aloha spirit is a real thing. So I asked Nola, did she think it would be okay? I asked permission. Is it okay if I conduct a Hawaiian piece on for this honor choir? And she said, yes, I think that would be great. And I said, okay, I've heard some of Justin Kaupu's arrangements. Do you think it would be okay if I asked him to write an arrangement? She said, I'd love that. And I said, okay, next question. Will you help him? Look at it. And so I was so thrilled. So this whole contention of my friends, including Kumahula came, and they brought me gifts, which was ridiculous. I should have been showering them with gifts. She taught them hula. She gave them the background of this piece, the cultural context. It was a piece by Liliuokalani. They all talked about it. It was you could just see those young faces just mesmerized by this whole world that they never knew. It's the same as when you introduce an all-state piece. Like I remember we were doing Brahms for one all-state, and we sang it through with my high school kids who were going the first time, and one of them looked at me and said, "That's beautiful." It's the same thing. You're opening this world,
Right.
and we've had the time. But back to what you were saying, I don't think we can teach all the practices, and it's one
Right.
of the mistakes I think that as a choral community, everybody gets so excited. I don't know, about 25 years ago about multicultural music. So they would do entire concerts. And that's one of the things I say, take one practice at a time. Don't try to do because then what happens is you can't get into the depth that you need to get into,
Yeah.
and then it begins to sound the same, not because it is, but because we're treating it that way. So I think just take it a step at a time. Um, there was something else you said that I reminded me, but yeah, taking it the one step at a time. And oh, I know what it was. Teaching them how to teach themselves, which
Mm.
is what I think was the greatest gift my voice teacher gave me. He taught me how to be my own teacher. Obviously, I need other help, but at least I can do some things on my own.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, the story you told about the Hawaiian piece, I think I have a theory that kind of that reminded me of that relates to this, maybe what was going on there. So you're talking about someone bringing you gifts, regardless of even though you felt like, well, I should be the one giving the gifts here because I
Exactly.
feel so grateful. But well, in my experience, in doing music from cultures. So I'm just going to try to, I know we're always told that we can't really ever know what it's like to be someone else and from a different culture, but I always believe that we can still try. Like I can try to
Mhm,
empathize, right? And if I'm part of a minority culture in a country, right? So I've moved to a new country and it's not
mhm,
everyone else. I don't think I necessarily would need my culture to be reflected all everywhere around me. I would just want to feel welcome. I would want to feel welcome, and so and I've had this experience in my school choirs and in adult choirs where, I have someone come up to me from the audience that I never knew would be there. It just was so grateful because we happened to do something that was from their culture,
mhm,
and they liked all the other stuff on the
mhm,
concert too, but they felt so welcome. I didn't expect you would do I had a Japanese folk song once,
right.
and a Japanese parent that I didn't know was gonna be there as mixed race family, and it was just she was in tears, and it wasn't even probably very good. Like, it was just but she felt so grateful that she felt welcome. because something from her language was there. And I think we shouldn't underestimate how powerful that can be for people.
I know, and exactly, and that's beautiful, this idea of feeling welcome, but I also think, I love, I think you've probably spoken with Marcus Garrett,
Uh-huh.
and
Yep.
I love his story about how he began his research into this non-idiomatic, because going to a school, that was not a historically Black college, when he got there, realized that he had so much information of all this great music that really was not being looked at or acknowledged in the mainstream. And I think that's what we're looking at. I know I redid my choral lit course completely. And there's already not enough time, but I just went through and every period changed it so that there was more representation, because I think because of, well, it's just the world has opened up. So like now we have music from places that we never would have had music from before.
Hmm.
And but also I think being aware, because even at Ithaca College, and it's an enlightened place, but way back, like in 1990, I brought in a person to teach West African singing, dancing, and drumming, and we did um, some pieces. And on that same concert, we did an Inuit piece, and there was a lot. There were a lot of different sounds, and I honestly thought they were gonna say, "Well, Janet, it's been really nice having you here, but we can't have that on the floor." But everybody loved it, and that's part of what I think inspired, because every time I would do something that pushed the envelope just a wee bit, the response was always so positive. And I felt people are hungry to have something new and different. And just like why I started doing presenting pieces um, differently. And I think the respect is a big part of it. I'll have to say, the first year I went to Hawaii, there's no way I would have asked anyone, did they think it would be okay? But I felt like, okay, I can at least ask, and they might say, "No, you shouldn't do that." I really wanted an honest answer, and, I asked people that I felt that I could trust to give me that honesty, and, I think we just it's almost when you do music of another culture, of a culture that's not your own, it's almost like you're holding someone else's dreams and past in your hands. And I I don't know, I just we started talking about programming, and I remember this beautiful quote that the dean at Ithaca College, Carl Ponek, who's such a beautiful speaker, he said, "If we were in a medical school, how well you do an appendectomy might make the difference in whether someone lives or dies." And
Yeah.
he said, "Well, my friends, someone will walk in this concert tonight sick, in need of healing, and how well you perform might very well make the difference in whether they leave broken or healed." And you say that gets to me, but that's we're dealing with such a powerful art. And so, I think we just owe it, to do our best. And look, I have favorites. I'm such a fangirl of so many people in this profession. I told Dawala Simmonsburg, I said, Dawala, I always listen whenever I'm doing a piece. I always want to hear what you've done with it, just because, not that I'm going to do it exactly like that, but I learn and I'm inspired.
Hmm.
Um, so anyway, that's a lot about why I like diversifying repertoire and taking those chances. But I think respect and we've heard it all summer, but the reality is doing the work,
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful.
doing the work.
It's beautiful. And I like, the way you kind of articulated that there at the end is that's something that I believe very strongly into, of just we can't know who in our audience really needs something that we have that night when we perform.
Exactly.
We just can't know. And so I tell that to the singers is that, since we can't know, we have to treat every single thing that we sing like something that somebody could need. And so what I tell them is I say, how dare you decide which piece you want to treat with respect because it's your favorite, because you don't know which piece somebody else might need. And maybe it's the goofy song on the program. Maybe it's like the one you think is the least important, but somebody came into that auditorium, like you said, broken and needing to just have their spirits lifted in some way. And you might look at it as being a silly piece, but that person really needed to just have something light, and maybe it's the piece that that's really hard and challenging, and somebody really needs to think, and take their mind off something. We just don't know, and I think that's a really important, very powerful part of our job. I think that's an awesome way of explaining it. So before I let you go, one of the ways I like to end different talks like this is, we've talked a lot about diversification of programming, which I think you've just written a manual here for us at the end, which is great. But on any topic really that you think is important, is there anything that is maybe that the choir world should be talking more about, but we aren't?
I really think that we need to talk more about why are we here?
Mm,
Why are we here? What are we trying to communicate? Um, how are we going to lift up every student? And look, uh, we I don't bat 1,000. I try, that's always the goal, and I can think of many times when I think, "Ugh, I fell short there. I didn't let that student know just how much they meant to me." And I think a lot of our why are those singers standing in front of us.
yep.
And a lot of our why is that audience that comes to listen. Uh, what are we trying to say to them? And so then the why becomes, if I really want to communicate to the audience and empower my students, what music is going to do that?
Hmm.
And I love, and it's not that I want to do all new or all, things that are out of the Western European canon. I love getting the idea of taking the students' hands and saying, "Students, here's Mozart," you
Hmm.
know, and acquainting them with that if they've never had that, because that was done for me. I didn't know. My daughter's an professional opera singer. Going to college, she had no interest in. She grew up in our house. My husband's a clarinetist. She wanted to do musical theater. She fell in love with opera the first time, so we switched from going to Broadway shows to going to the Met, and it changed overnight. We still go to Broadway shows, but she wanted to go to the Met, so I think, um, why are we here? And the other thing is, and there was a lovely article, um, about this in the recent Choral Journal, but it's more than programming. It can't be, "Okay, done." We have to really dig in, and I find myself so much better musician now for having learned these things. I mean, Tony Guzman came one summer to Ithaca. Oh my lord, we had such a good time, and I learned so much. Um, uh, and I find myself a much better musician, um, as we do that, but it's more than programming. He talked about it as the low-hanging fruit. I think if all you do is put it on your program, it is. But if you do it in a thoughtful, meaningful, respectful way, I think it can have great impact on the students.
Absolutely. That is very well said. And we appreciate, of course, all of your time and your wisdom. with this conversation. I think it's going to be really helpful for people. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much. And look, I want to make sure I don't hold myself up as like this is it's just I've done a lot of work and I will continue to learn. I am still learning every day. And this summer I talked to so many friends. During all of this summer, I just said to one friend, I just feel like I need to listen. I need to listen more and talk less and, open my heart, open my ears, because people are going through things that I, I don't, I don't have that experience. But it's important to be an ally. And so this last year has been a lot of studying about how to be a better ally.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. That's
Thank you.
perfect way to end it. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much. It was
All
fun
right.
to talk with you.
Yeah, have a great night.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of the podcast. I hope you got something out of that. I know that that's a topic that I really struggle with because I want to achieve that ideal of having a truly diverse program. But the reality then sets in, which is that I have limited time and I have limited songs I can put in front of kids, and I've got limited experience with the kids. Then I have the other expectation, which is to be an expert in that style when I present it. And there's just not enough time in a lifetime. And so, really, I think what's going on there and what you heard us discuss is if your process is aligned, so that your process is the same to explore, to discover as much as you possibly can, then you are doing the work that the music deserves. And it's okay to have it not be perfect. And I think that's really important to spread that message, to hear that message, that if you're doing your due diligence, that's enough, right? And part of that then becomes growth over time. So as always, if you're still here, that means you probably did get something valuable out of the episode. And so what I hope you will do is take a few steps to show your appreciation and help me spread the word. As you heard me say at the very beginning of the episodes, it's getting harder and harder. Facebook stock is doing great in the pandemic, by the way, and this is partly why. They know that we are dependent upon them for our small businesses, and they're fleecing us. So help us out in any way that you possibly can. And here is the kind of the list of things you can do, the super easy one-click things: like, share, leave ratings, leave comments. Anything that you choose to interact with the content that you see, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, for the Choreolosophy podcast, helps other people see the content. That's really, really important. And that's a free way to help. Then, of course, there's the Patreon page, patreon.com/Choreolosophy, which kind of unofficially is underwriting the cost of this Facebook advertisement and social media advertisement that I have to do to get people to listen. And that's the vicious cycle there. So that's very helpful. And then, of course, there is also the using of the promo codes at all of these awesome vendors that support the show. And the way they support the show is by allowing you to choose voluntarily, if you buy their product, to use that promo code. It's a win-win. Win for you, win for them, win for your program, wherever, and you're getting great products and services in the choral world. So all those things are very, very helpful. And when I say that the show is completely listener supported, that's what I mean. It's just me talking into a microphone with these awesome guests, and then you choosing to help spread the word. That's how it all works. That's the biz of the podcast world. And it's so much fun. I love doing it. But if you're available to and able to do any of those things to help, you're the real MVP. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.